This is BBC One in the south. Now the 10 o'clock news with Hugh Edwards and Alan Sinclair.
British troops might start to leave Iraq next year if the situation stabilises. Tony Blair makes a surprise Christmas visit to forces in Basra and says they could be withdrawn as soon as the Iraqis are able to provide their own security. We'll be reporting on the visit and assessing the likelihood of withdrawal, also tonight. Plans to merge dozens of police forces in England and Wales run into more trouble. Allegations that the bones of the late Alistair Cooke were stolen before his cremation. And inside an orphanage in Sri Lanka almost a year after the tsunami.
In the south, a major police investigation is underway after a woman died in a suspected arson attack. And rail misery for Christmas. Travellers, engineering work promises disruption.
Good evening. It's possible that British troops could start to pull out from Iraq as early as next June if the situation there becomes more stable. That was the prospect apparently held out by Tony Blair today after he'd made a surprise visit to the troops near Basra. It's his fourth visit since Saddam Hussein was overthrown. James Landale is among those who's travelled with the Prime Minister.
In southern Iraq, the skies are safer than any road, so if you can, you travel by air. And visiting politicians are no exception. Tony Blair arrived here from Kuwait, keen to thank British troops. Their work, he said, was making the region safer and striking a blow against terrorism.
The people want a democracy, and if we get a democracy functioning in Iraq, it'll make this region safer, it'll make the world safer, and it'll also deal a real body blow to the international terrorism that every single country, all the civilized countries of the world face.
Tony Blair likes this kind of thing, chatting with the troops, posing for photos, and listening to an impromptu sing-along with Fijian-born troops. And the soldiers respond in kind. Morale, they say, is high.
You've done 3 tours. How many tours would you be happy to do here? As many as it takes. As long as it takes. We came here to do a job, and that job's not complete yet. Once we can get the Iraqi forces and the police services doing their job, as they should be doing, then that'll be our time to come home.
The troops just wish they could spend less time protecting themselves and more time helping Iraqis. This is Tony Blair's 4th visit to Basra since the overthrow of Saddam Hussein. The problem is, for many of these troops, this Christmas visit is becoming as much a part of the tradition as the imported turkey and the tinsel. And therein lies the problem. And that's why Mr. Blair also met these people, the most important British and American military commanders in Iraq. Yes, they discussed the political situation after the elections, but they also talked about security. And these days, that also means when the troops can come home.
It's our strategy. We want to draw down our own forces. I mean, we don't want to keep people here longer than we need to, but I think, again, they will say, talking to Iraqis, that whatever difficulties there are from time to time, the Iraqis themselves know it's important that our troops stay and do the job.
Nothing's expected till after the new government's formed in the spring. But Tony Blair is now hoping he doesn't have to spend too many more Christmases in southern Iraq.
Well, we can talk to James Landale now. He's on the Prime Minister's plane. James, this talk tonight of possibly 6 months in terms of an initial withdrawal, could you give us a little more context to that suggestion?
Well, Hugh, let's be clear about this. At no time today has the Prime Minister or his spokesman said that British troops will start withdrawing from Iraq in 6 months' time. What they have done, however, is dropped a pretty clear signal that if the new government is formed successfully next year, if the provincial elections take place peacefully in the spring, then by the summer, possibly maybe, then they might be in a position to start considering withdrawing some troops. Now, Mr. Blair said he was very encouraged by what he'd learned in Iraq today, particularly what the British troops had said about their confidence in the Iraqi forces and their capability today. And also when we ourselves, the travelling press, put the whole issue of 6 months to him, the Prime Minister didn't try very hard to knock it down. But what he and his spokesman said today very clearly is, look, there is no artificial deadline. And above all, there are a lot of hurdles to go and to be passed through before any British troops can come home.
James, on Mr. Blair's plane, thank you very much. Well, much of the violence in southern Iraq is being blamed on Shia Muslim militia groups. Dozens of local people are killed in the region every month, and senior army commanders accept there are serious problems in the area of British control around Basra, and few signs yet of the stability needed before troops might withdraw. Here's our defence correspondent, Paul Wood.
Men like these will determine if and when British troops can leave southern Iraq. Shiite militias have proliferated since the invasion. The gunmen are behind many of the 65 murders a month in Basra. Some locals speak of a reign of terror. For failing to wear an Islamic headscarf, this woman was shot.
Gunmen fired at my friend first, then one came towards me and shot 2 bullets into my leg. I can't walk anymore. All the girls are afraid now. Isn't the British Army supposed to protect us?
We always blame the American and the British force. Instead of getting us Disneyland or introducing the McDonald's or Kentucky Chicken, they brought us a lot of clerics with turbans, as if we've been complaining of having a shortage of them.
British soldiers are threatened by more deadly and accurate bombs than ever before, so the troops spend almost 2/3 of their time protecting themselves. The rest is devoted to their mission, training the new Iraqi forces.
What we must try and persuade the Iraqis to do is take control of their own destinies. Yes, you can train them, but if you were to drop them into this very difficult environment of Iraq with the security situation, there's a very good chance that it might fragment or fail.
Fragmentation would look like this: Shiite factional fighting 3 months ago. British commanders predict more such violence ahead. This is not promising soil in which to plant a Western-style open society.
The coalition came to Iraq in the first place to bring democracy and human rights. On the other hand, it's also here to give Iraq back to the Iraqis. That's the dilemma the British Army faces when it's asked by local people to deal with human rights abuses by the militias.
The hope is to leave southern Iraq better than we found it, but stability and order, those will be the overriding tests for a British exit. Paul Wood, BBC News, Basra.
The Home Secretary is facing a growing crisis over his plans to merge dozens of police forces in England and Wales. The Association of Police Authorities says that none of its members will be submitting full plans for mergers before tomorrow's deadline. Charles Clark wants to reduce the number of forces from over 40 to as few as 12, as Margaret Gilmore reports.
Merry Christmas to you.
And to you also.
Never has police work been more diverse. 1 minute officers are policing local communities, the next they could be dealing with a terrorist threat. But are fewer, bigger forces the answer? It looks like there'll be a real showdown over this. Tonight, the Association of Police Authorities upped the ante in its campaign against government plans to merge smaller forces.
They've been rushed. They haven't given us enough time to develop fully robust business cases, haven't given us enough time to consult with our communities, and we've been very restricted in terms of the number of options we can put forward.
The police authorities were given a deadline of tomorrow for submitting full business plans on how they'll cope with mergers. Tonight, 24 hours before it expires, not one of the 43 has done so, though some are expected to submit outline plans. And these are the reforms the row's all about. In the biggest shake-up for more than 30 years, ministers want to reduce the number of forces from 43 to as few as 12. Forces of under 4,000 staff are most vulnerable to merger. The government believes bigger forces are necessary to tackle cross-border crimes. Everyone agrees there are gaps in dealing with terrorism and organised crime, but some worry the government's going too far.
There needs to be a degree of flexibility about how we best address those gaps. So for some forces it's right they'll be merged and amalgamated. For others they will need to stand alone, and for others we need to look at more different forms of collaboration so that we can close our gaps.
Thank you very much indeed for coming here this morning.
But despite the police authority campaign, not everyone's against. Today, 3 forces, West Midlands, Warwickshire and Staffordshire, announced they're happy to merge.
There's a new strategic force will have the critical mass to not only guarantee the current level of local policing, but to actually improve it.
Tonight, the Home Office played down the significance of the rebellion, saying they'd hold further discussions in January. Margaret Gilmore, BBC News.
And Margaret's with me now. Margaret, obviously there's a lot of disquiet in some quarters over these plans. How significant is the opposition, do you think?
Hugh, I think there's no doubt that some of these police authorities are spoiling for a fight. Many of their members are elected councillors who see this as highly political, and some of them are having to fight turf wars, because if there are mergers, some of them will be out of a job. And on top of all of this, there are cash allocations linked to these reforms. So each police authority is trying to squeeze the best deal it can out of the government. So I think there will be a showdown, and the government will have to change some of its plans, but I think ultimately these reforms will go through. What is in question is how many fewer forces there'll be.
Thank you very much. Police investigating the failed bomb attacks in London on July the 21st have charged a man tonight with conspiracy to cause explosions. Adel Yaha, a 23-year-old student from North London, was arrested at Gatwick Airport on Tuesday. He will appear before Bow Street magistrates in central London tomorrow. A youth worker has been jailed for life for torturing and murdering his 3-month-old daughter. Sitab Ullah, who is 26, beat Samira to death because he believed she was possessed by evil spirits. Police said that Ullah from northwest London had become sadistic and paranoid because of his addiction to crack cocaine. The number of criminals who go on to reoffend has hit a record level since Labour came to power, according to figures released by the Home Office. They show that in England and Wales, almost 60% of adult criminals were convicted of new offences within 2 years. The number of former prisoners reoffending has also gone up to 67%. And almost 90% of offenders on the government's drug treatment scheme went on to commit more crimes. Richard Bilton reports on the efforts to try to limit the extent of serial reoffending.
Hey, man, is he in? Yeah, come in.
There's a small group of people in Bolton getting used to this knock on the door.
Just got up.
We can't identify this man, but he's back with his family after 2 years in prison.
He never used to do that with anyone at all. He used to just go out and that rate. I never seen him until police knocks at my door.
And this is offender targeting. These officers, probation and police, are in his home because of his prolific record.
So you're being monitored quite a lot by us, by the police, by all sorts of different services.
Nationally, it's estimated 10% of criminals carry out 50% of crime. So here in Bolton, they go after them. Daily visits, change your life or go back inside.
I don't want to go back to prison. I've had enough of jail now. I've been doing it since I was 16. I'm only 23 now, like, but I just don't want them following about too much, so because it'll do me head in and get me paranoid a bit.
But his case shows how complicated the problem is, because since this was filmed, he's been rearrested and charged with a new offence. The government's policy is all about high-profile monitoring, though. There are teams like this across the country targeting the few who spoil it for the rest.
These offenders are prolific offenders. And they commit a lot of crime, and we are supervising and monitoring them on a daily basis, and the fact that in doing so we're disrupting the normal behaviour, which would be to go and commit crime on a regular basis.
So where it used to be about rehabilitation, it's now about stopping crime.
Morning.
Drug addiction has given Mick a life in and out of prison.
Did you use Saturday?
I think so, yeah.
Right, did you
He's only 36 and says he wants to change. Reoffending, though, is much more likely amongst addicts, and Mick has used again.
What have you just done by letting this particular individual in?
Well, I've messed it up, haven't I?
Yeah.
If I weren't on the programme, I'd be out shoplifting and that, and raising, trying to get money for drugs. I think they're getting me on the straight and narrow, yeah. Yeah, they're all right. Good lads.
So it is working for Mick, but these are expensive programmes. Should so much funding be spent on those who've caused so much trouble?
All I can say really is that, you know, that we're working really hard to try and to turn individuals around, because that's the best guarantee, if you like, that there's not going to be any future victims.
You're all right where you are, and you can see.
And another key part of the programme is this, when offenders gather to talk about what they've done.
We committed the crime.
We've done that.
Still, we might stop committing crime, but there's still others committing crime.
I don't want to go back inside, but if I don't get a job soon, I'm going to end up doing something bad, aren't I?
It is all about individual cases, and here they say schemes like this have helped to cut crime. But today's figures show nationally reducing reoffending is a problem that hasn't gone away. Richard Bilton, BBC News, Bolton.
And still to come on tonight's programme. A deadly journey for some, the wave of Mexican immigrants trying to start a new life in America. Many of the children who survived last year's Asian tsunami live in fear of another disaster, according to a United Nations survey. But the same study reveals that more than two-thirds believe their lives have improved compared to the weeks immediately following the disaster. In Sri Lanka, 35,000 people were killed, 12,000 of them children. Another 1,000 were left orphaned. Navdeep Dhariwal sent this report from an orphanage in the northeast of the country.
Songs about a happy future. These are the faces of young survivors who've endured a conflict that stole their parents and a tsunami that stole their friends. The new Tender Sprouts home opened last month. The children's protection ensured by a building that's safely miles from the sea. The orphanage is full once again. Last December, the children's sanctuary couldn't protect them from the sea. 30 young bodies were recovered. 93 children are still missing. After the tsunami, we met Naranjana. Grief and shock had silenced her. Unable to hold on to the 3-year-old, torn from her arms, she was tormented with nightmares. Today, the 14-year-old wears an infectious smile. She still talks about the tsunami. It's helped her put the worst memories behind her.
The sea is not here. I'm no longer afraid. The roof doesn't leak. There are a lot of people around, and I'm happy.
Up to 6 months ago, the children were still having nightmares. UNICEF says more than half of Sri Lanka's children, even now, live in fear of another tsunami. But they are optimistic of a brighter future. The pictures drawn by the surviving children show how far they've come. Last year's trauma, though, lingers on. 9-year-old Sinthuja can't forget seeing her friends being washed away by the wave. The memories are still there. Sometimes the children get together and talk about it, and whether the tsunami will come again. I don't think they will ever forget it. The ruined St. Peter's Church, near the old orphanage, is to be a memorial to the town's victims. Among the thousands of names that will be carved into the stone will be those of the children. The familiar place where the orphans once led a carefree life is unrecognisable. Watching them walk over the ruins is a stark reminder of what they've endured and how strong they've been. Navdeep Dhariwal, BBC News, Northern Sri Lanka.
In America, police are investigating reports that the bones of the late broadcaster Alistair Cooke were stolen before his cremation and sold to companies who trade in body parts. 2 New York papers claim that the bones were sold for more than $7,000. Mr. Cooke died in March last year from lung cancer. He was 95. Gito Harry sent this report from New York.
Good evening. Alistair Cooke spent half a century sending a weekly letter from America to British audiences. He died here on the Upper East Side of Manhattan, and 2 days after his body was taken to a local funeral home, his widow received his ashes. Then last week, the family was told that the bones of Alistair Cooke had been removed before he was cremated and sold for $7,000 to a criminal ring trading illegally in body parts. Investigative journalist Bill Sherman says the scale of the operation was huge and that corpses taken without consent ended up being used in legitimate operations.
And these companies took the bones anyway, cut them up, and they are now in dozens of people in the form of dental implants. There are dowels used for other orthopedic procedures, bone replacement.
And Alistair Cooke's family are appalled.
Oh, I'm outraged. I mean, I can't believe it. It's obscene. It's Dickensian, you know. It's amazing what depths people will sink to make money. Relatives of the broadcasting legend are particularly upset that his cancerous bones were passed on to people in need of a healthy transplant. Gitta Hari, BBC News, New York.
In the United States, President Bush is facing intense criticism over his handling of immigration policy. Many of the president's natural supporters are reported to believe that he's failed to stop the tide of illegal immigrants who enter from Mexico. Each week, an estimated 10,000 people cross the Mexican border into the US. But the tough journey claims the lives of many would-be migrants. Recent months have seen a rise in activity by anti-immigrant vigilantes. From the border, Matt Fry sent this report.
Sasabe on the US-Mexican border, a town thriving on a certain kind of travel industry. The dusty air is thick with anticipation, and every day as the shadows get longer, the travelers gather in the departure lounge, a disused brick factory. Meet the people who travel between worlds, the third and the first, on foot, in fear, and equipped with nothing more than the water they can carry. Did your son try and stop you from coming? I asked Enrique. Of course he did. He's 10, he told me. But what can he do? I need the work. We need the money. Even he understands that. They're called walkers, and there are over 10,000 of them each week. It'll take at least 4 days and nights to cross the desert and reach the nearest town in the US. According to the law of averages, 1 in 1,000 will die of exhaustion, and 1 in 3 will get caught. This is where the people we met try and walk to first. Tucson, Arizona's second city. If they get this far, it's easy for them to disappear in the urban undergrowth, which is why Captain James Dean and his Black Hawk helicopter try and catch them first. In this game, both sides use tricks. The walkers dig holes and hide in the sand. The Border Patrol use the Black Hawk helicopters like a giant fan, whipping up the ground, and then returning to see if anyone is moving. This time it works. The border guards give chase. The walkers don't even try to run. The final tally is 8.
Are you increasingly on the lookout for potential terrorists here? I think all of these people are terrorists to my country. The people down there are terrorists? I believe they are. They're terrorizing me.
On the ground, the statistics melt away. Take Pascual, until a few minutes ago hoping to work on a farm in California. He and the others will now be deported back to Mexico, but most will try again, probably tomorrow. The day shift has ended, the night shift has only just begun. But they're not the only ones looking.
They just knew I was there, and so I lit them up with a flashlight, and then they took off like a deer.
Meet Whispering Bob Coon and his fellow Minutemen, up all night, armed with determination and night vision goggles, hoping to catch migrants.
Last night, sightings, we had 11 people.
There are 5,000 of them patrolling the border. The guns that this dad's army carries are only supposed to be used in self-defense. They're committed and bitter.
Little grandmothers are being frisked, you know, going through airport security, and 6-year-old children. However, we have millions of people every year who walk into this country carrying backpacks and are not subjected to the same screening that American citizens are.
Arizona is now ground zero in the whole battle over illegal migration. There's even a growing number of citizens and politicians who want to turn this flimsy fence into a permanent wall along the whole border between the US and Mexico. And yet the face of the nation is changing because of economics. whether it's Miguel from Argentina blowing leaves or Jorge from El Salvador preparing lunch. 60% of workers in the service industry are migrants. There are now many more Hispanics than blacks in this country. America can't live without them, but can it live with them? Matt Fry, BBC News, Arizona.
And you can see more of Matt's report in a documentary on BBC News 24 starting at 5:30 p.m. on Christmas Day. Right, we'll be back with the headlines in a few minutes, and on BBC News 24 tonight, the latest from New York on the investigation into claims that a gang stole the bones of the late BBC broadcaster Alistair Cooke. But here on BBC One, it's time to join our news teams across the UK. Bye for now.
Good evening, I'm Alan Sinclair with the news here in the south. A major police investigation is underway after a woman died in a suspected arson attack in Southampton. A man who was also badly injured in the fire at a bedsit in Exmoor Road has been treated in hospital. More from Steve Humphrey.
Throughout the evening, there's been intense police activity in and around Exmoor Roads near the Royal Southampton Hospital in the centre of Southampton. Emergency services were called to a fire on the first floor of a house at 1:45 this afternoon. A young woman with burns died at the scene despite attempts to revive her. The exact cause of her death isn't yet known, and a man aged about 30 was taken to Southampton General Hospital with burns and a head injury. A police spokeswoman said both the death of the woman and the fire are being treated as suspicious. 60 officers are involved in the investigation, and a Home Office pathologist has been called to the scene. Tonight, the man leading the investigation, Detective Superintendent Alan Betts, appealed for anyone who saw or heard anything suspicious in Exmoor Road at around 1:45 this afternoon to contact the police as soon as possible. Steve Humphrey, BBC South Today, Southampton.
A new head coach has been appointed at Southampton Football Club. They'll confirm George Burley in the post at a news conference tomorrow. Burley parted company with the Scottish club Hearts in October. His appointment is likely to be welcomed by most supporters, who expressed surprise when Saints were strongly linked with unknown Dutchman Mark Watter earlier this week. Burley will work closely with Sir Clive Woodward, who assumes the new position of Director of Football. A huge part of the South's rail network will be shut down for Christmas. Passenger groups are warning of severe disruption to South West train services during a multi-million-pound track replacement programme. This now from our transport correspondent Paul Clifton.
Closing the railway at Woking guarantees problems for passengers. It's where the main lines from Southampton and Portsmouth meet. Track on both routes will be replaced. Engineers have spent months planning the £13 million project. It's going to affect just about every service from Waterloo to the south coast, from late on Christmas Eve until early on January the 3rd.
Well, there's no good time to do this type of work. It is going to affect our passengers, but over the Christmas period, traditionally not as many people travel on the railway, so it is exactly the right time to do it.
Trains to Southampton, Bournemouth and Weymouth will go down the Portsmouth line instead. Journeys will be much longer.
What we have to do basically is divert a lot of our trains so they go on different lines and so they bypass the affected area. Anybody that is travelling directly within that area, then we put them on replacement bus services and then join them up with a train service later on in their journey.
Trains from Salisbury will only get as far as Basingstoke. From there, buses will replace trains to Woking. It will also be a bus ride from Woking to Farnborough, Guildford and Aldershot, and there'll be no through trains to Alton. Passengers always complain about closures like this, but the track repairs have to be done. Paul Clifton, BBC South Today.
Investigations are underway into an alleged assault on an inmate at Camp Hill Prison on the Isle of Wight. A 26-year-old prisoner was treated in hospital for cuts to his hands and neck. He claims he was stabbed by a fellow inmate. Shelter is calling on the government to commit to building an extra 4,000 low-cost rented homes a year in the region. The charity says too many families are living in temporary housing, which has a terrible impact, especially on children.
It could deprive them of schooling. On average, children who live in temporary accommodation miss 55 days per year of their school. That's about 25% of the school year. Equally, it affects their health, their well-being, and it can damage their future prospects.
A baby penguin stolen from an Isle of Wight zoo has been making headlines around the world. Police and volunteers have continued to follow up reported sightings since Toga the penguin was stolen at the weekend. But as Bryony Leyland reports, hopes of finding baby Toga alive are beginning to fade.
A baby penguin is missing. The baby's name is Toga.
Toga's story has found sympathetic audiences around the world. This was NBC's coverage in America. Back at Toga's home on the Isle of Wight, mystery still surrounds his disappearance at the weekend. His keeper says his mother has been showing signs of distress. She's been off her food. The concern is Toga won't survive long without her, as he feeds from her and wouldn't accept food from humans.
I can't really think about it or talk about crying or whatever. It's just a nightmare. Just hope that he's still keeping warm and sat up somewhere waiting for us to go and get him, really.
Getting into the penguin enclosure would mean scaling 2 walls. There were new leads today. Anonymous calls led to a search of Portsmouth Harbour, but nothing was found. Meanwhile, messages of support are flooding in from all over the world as Toga's story travels further.
We swap all the publicity in the world for just getting him back, you know. We'd rather have had a quiet week and him being with his parents. But it's amazing. We've had emails from all across the world, and apparently even the troops in Iraq have emailed somebody on the Isle of Wight to find out the latest information.
Staff know Toga's chances of survival are diminishing with time. The police say they're taking the case seriously. The police hope the high profile of this case will lead to some firm information. The reward for the safe return of Toga stands at nearly £10,000. Bryony Leyland for BBC South Today at Amazon World on the Isle of Wight.
On to the weather now, and tonight will be generally cloudy and mild with mist and low cloud. Temperatures down to 7 Celsius. Friday will again be mostly cloudy and dry with some brighter spells later, a high of 10 degrees Celsius. And that's it from us for now. Caroline is here in the morning with our next update. Meanwhile, there's more on CFAX page 160 on our web pages and your local radio station. Now back to Hugh. Bye-bye.
Main news tonight, British troops may start to leave Iraq next year if the situation stabilises there. In a surprise visit to forces in Basra today, Tony Blair said they could be withdrawn as soon as the Iraqis are able to provide their own security. Newsnight is starting over on BBC Two now, but from all of us here on the 10 o'clock team, good night.
Good evening. For a few days we've been hinting at a quiet run into the Christmas weekend. That holds. It's thereafter things may change. But for the night, the cloudy, the mild conditions will continue. It's the cloud actually acting like a blanket which will inhibit frost formation once again, although the Channel Islands could get quite chilly. But this cloud has given quite a bleak day across parts of Scotland and Northern Ireland, and although the heaviest rain is now fizzling out, we've still a few more hours of damp weather to come here, and our ribbon of thicker cloud and rain will come to rest actually across parts of Northern Ireland and Northern England by the end of the night and through the day tomorrow. But for the north of Northern Ireland, we're fairly confident of a drier day and an increasingly bright day here, and certainly so for Scotland, much drier and brighter, although the morning will bring a fair brisk wind and some quite sharp showers across the Northern Isles. But most of the thick cloud will be across the northwest of England for the drive to work, the Pennines, the Lake District, the Peak District as well. Further south, however, despite a few breaks in the cloud and perhaps a little bit of morning mist and fog, it will be a mild start for all but the Channel Islands. But there'll still be a few dribs and drabs of rain around the Irish sea coasts of Devon, Cornwall, the Irish Sea again, but I'm hopeful that these will tend to die out through the day. And in fact, for many parts of England and Wales, the skies will brighten as the cloud thins, and there'll be some breaks to allow some sunshine, particularly through the Midlands and East Wales. We'll hold on to a bit more cloud for eastern or southern coastal counties of England. And as you can see, much more sunshine for Scotland. However, for Northern Ireland, particularly southern parts here, will hold on to some rather damp and dreary weather. Follow that across the Irish Sea for the Isle of Man, for Cumbria, for the Pennines. So a rather dank day here, all said. But if it's raining or if it's sunny with you, still a mild day for all, with very little wind away from the north of Scotland. But the north of Scotland will catch further showers, the northeast at least on Christmas Eve. But for most of us, a repeat performance, probably thinner cloud though for the likes of Northern England and Northern Ireland. A little bit more chance of a frost at first thing on Christmas Day, we feel, and perhaps some patchy fog, hence temperatures around average as opposed to a little above tomorrow. But here's the reason for the settled weather through the Christmas weekend. High pressure, but here comes the change. The potential for a northeasterly wind on Boxing Day. If that comes off, it may well usher a few wintry showers into parts of East Anglia and the southeast. So perhaps a little sign of snow as we head into the beginning of next week, but otherwise a quiet run in through the Christmas weekend. That's all from me for the next few days. May I wish you a Merry Christmas. Bye-bye.